Hey everybody, it's Mattie here with Altcoin Buzz. Hope you're doing well and that your weekend is off to a great start. We've got a lot of fun international news, more out of Russia. It's Russia lately, but a lot of headlines are being made in that country. We're going to take a look at a couple of those. We're going to look at other international news out of Venezuela and how people are responding to the out of control inflation that's happening there with the local currency. And then we have a piece featuring a perspective that's actually quite unique out of Africa and a similar situation there. But we're going to begin with this article on altcoinbuzz.io by Chris, who talks about Circle. So they seek banking license and more. Pretty big development. Circle, which as you guys may remember, is an extension of the Goldman Sachs family. So officially, right, that's where the ownership stems from. Circle to pursue a federal banking license along with a registration as a brokerage and trading venue with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. This could open the floodgates for unregistered security coins and tokens to be traded legally in the US. So Circle is looking to really, I think, make a move maybe preemptively and gain control in a certain way that's going to help them out. You know, we've heard about all of this news coming out of the SEC and comments made by Mr. Clayton. You have people like companies, I should say, like Ripple that are arming themselves with former SEC chairwomen and just bracing themselves, making sure that if and when a decision comes down that may affect them negatively, they're prepared to fight it. So pretty interesting. You have the chief executive officer of Circle here. So he said, "It's uncharted territory. No venture that began in the largely unchecked world of digital currencies has obtained such status with U.S. regulators. While getting a banking license would subject it to tough scrutiny, the move would winnow the field of regulators Circle must appease because federal laws would preempt a patchwork of state rules covering crypto." So what would a banking license really mean for Circle? Well, it would help them to comply, as pointed out here, with individual state regulators because they wouldn't have to necessarily be subject to all of those state-by-state laws. The federal license would suffice. And it would also allow them to rely less on intermediary banks, potentially store investors' crypto and fiat, and deal directly with the Federal Reserves. So to hold reserves with the Federal Reserve, to natively access the central banking system without intermediaries, to directly settle with other banks in other markets around the world through those networks, that can improve the efficiency of what we deliver. It can reduce the costs, said Allaire. So this is a pretty big deal. And again, I think it's directly, we can infer that it's directly in response to what's been happening with Mr. Clayton out of the SEC, who's basically said Bitcoin, because it is a currency, because it's not a fundraising effort that's taking your money and giving you tokens in exchange for an ICO type of startup structure. No, that's not a security, but pretty much everything else I think is on the table to be considered as such, as a security. So let's see what happens with Circle. I think this is a strategic corporate move because, again, if you think Circle, you got to think Goldman Sachs, and behind the scenes, they're getting in on the game. They want to make sure they're positioned well. So let's see what the license kind of manifests as far as an advantage for Circle. But this is a big strategic move as I see it, and it's going to be very interesting to keep tabs on this and see how it plays out. If you want to look at some of the reporting here done by Bloomberg, we're going to link to this, of course, in the description. So crypto unicorn Circle aims to expand into regulated banking. Do be sure to leave a comment below with your perspectives on this story. So in our Russian news segment with Lysia, Russian central bank will control the crypto market, a top official confirms. So you have an article here on altcoinbuzz.io. This week, Moscow is hosting the first blockchain conference in its Federation Council, the upper house of the parliament. During it, a top official has confirmed that the Russian central bank will start controlling the crypto market. So a little bit of context here. You have all kinds of new attention that's kind of been focused on cryptocurrency. You've had recent laws that have been passed this week in the Russian Duma, and you have this digital currency law. So there's all kinds of regulation and standards that have been associated with that. But importantly, the law states that cryptocurrency is an illegal payment method and says that the central bank should be the primary institution to control the emerging market. So in response to this, you have the federal agency News that interviewed the first deputy of the Federal Council. So that's a Mr. Sergei Kalishnikov. He made it clear that Russia is willing to allow cryptocurrency and blockchain, but only if it has the final say. So it seems like he's not quite rejecting what the law states, but he's indicating that perhaps it's open to interpretation. So here is his comment, quote, "At the moment, the Russian central bank is the financial politics main actor, not the Minfin, not the Minkonomratsvitia, Ministry of Economic Development, even though that would make much more sense. Hence, the bank is the main regulatory body and has been allocated numerous governmental functions. It is the primary ideologist of the current financial system, which is, by the way, inefficient." A little bit of a jab there, so by Kalishnikov. It's an interesting tone that he struck. So Alicia suggests that it's a sarcastic one towards the central bank, and I think I would tend to agree. There's been all kinds of news recently out of Russia, and the fact that that law just came out, the fact that this guy is perhaps not contradicting it, but clearly signaling and clearly indicating that it may be subject to interpretation based on the control of the system that Russia adopts. You've had a lot of bullish news, though. You've had the Russian central bank that's issued a report on cryptocurrency. You've had the finance minister, Alex Moiseev. Recently, we covered that, who said that Russia might introduce cryptocurrency on its exchange market. Vladimir Putin, of course, president of Russia, came out and said blockchain is really important going forward. Then you have this contradictory stuff. You have the law that was passed by the Duma, and you have this central banker, Olga Skorobatova, who's the first deputy governor of the central bank, and she stated that blockchain remains immature. We covered that as well. So like many other countries, it's ambivalent, it's back and forth. There's good news, there's bad news. But let's see what happens with this. I'm curious to know what'll happen if Russia does choose to officially take a stance as a party, a nation that's interested in cryptocurrency, because that's going to make them very interesting geopolitically, to see how they contrast against China, to see how they contrast against the US. It's one thing for these smaller countries like Malta, Belize, the Virgin Islands to say, hey, we're crypto havens, we're part of the crypto niche. But Russia, that's a big player geopolitically. So the unfolding of this story and the development is going to be something to watch. Be sure to leave a comment below, guys. Maybe you are Russian, or maybe you are more familiar with the culture than I am. You can take a look at some of these original links here. So we're talking about the Russian law that was put out by the Duma. Some of the response that we've seen, coverage by Fan that interviewed Mr. Kalishnikov, and it's going to be in the original Russian, but we'll link to it nonetheless if you want to take a look. In other Russian news, this goes back to a previous article, so we're not going to review it, but just so you're aware, Russia might introduce cryptocurrency on its exchange market. So this is what we covered formerly with the Deputy Minister of Finance. And you have some other news here, also by Licia, who seems to be our local Russian agent, or perhaps she's a spy at this point. I don't know, but she definitely knows the ropes when it comes to Russian news. Blockchain technology remains immature, Russian central banker believes. So if you need a recap on those stories, we're going to link to them below in the description. You can take a look. Would love to hear your comments, guys. I mean, if you consider the entirety of the picture and the developments that are happening in Russia, there's a lot going on, and there are different angles, there are different ways to interpret it. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. We'd love to refer to them and check them out. In other international news, article here by Garrett, amid runaway inflation, Venezuelans turn to Bitcoin as an alternative store of value. So we've talked a little bit about this in the past, and it's just a really interesting story to keep tabs on. Local Bitcoin's data shows an ever-increasing amount of Venezuelan Bolivar being converted into Bitcoin, BTC. So this development likely comes from the hyperinflation that Venezuela is suffering. And you hear all these stories, perhaps some are, fairly just anecdotal, but you have Venezuelans that are paying for goods with trash bags full of Bolivar because the hyperinflation has been so extreme. The money just gets devalued more and more, really even on a daily basis. Consumer prices are projected to skyrocket over 14,000% this year. And it's funny because people talk about the instability and the volatility of the cryptocurrency market. We were at a market cap of 850 billion. We're down about 500 billion from that benchmark, that high point. But I mean, that's nothing in terms of when you compare it to countries that really have, fiscal policy meltdowns and they have runaway hyperinflation. Crypto is relatively stable versus those situations, and we're seeing that, unfortunately, in Venezuela. So they've talked about removing 3 zeros from the Bolivar's value. That's just a bandage. That doesn't really affect or change the underlying problems with the system. And you can take a look here at weekly local Bitcoin's volume. in terms of Venezuelan bolivar. And this is, a weekly chart. You can see that the uptick here was extreme, especially in starting in April and May of 2018. Quite a jump right there. So it's, look, I mean, it's unfortunate. Venezuela is going through some problems at the moment. And to the extent that it can help, and it's encouraging to see that crypto is playing a role here, because even, as I said, as unstable, as volatile as crypto is, it has that reputation. It's much more consistent and it's much more dependable than the bolivar in this case. You may also recall that there was this petro, which was the oil-backed cryptocurrency that Venezuela tried introducing. I mean, I guess the jury is still out on that one. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, it seems like Bitcoin is making, nice... is helping alleviate this situation. And this is a humanitarian issue as I see it, because you hear about the poverty, you hear about the dire straits that some people are in. If crypto can help at all, that's a good thing to see. So I hope if there are any listeners out there in Venezuela with a unique perspective, we would love to hear that. Of course, we hope and pray for the best in that country. It's a difficult situation right now, but we're going to stay on top of this. And again, hope that things improve to the extent that crypto can play a role in mending things. Then that's obviously what we want to see. You can read an article here by Forbes. Does Venezuela's oil-backed petro have the power to showcase national cryptocurrencies? And an article here by Reuters. Venezuela annual inflation nears 14,000 percentage points. So that's something that is not sustainable. Let's see what happens going forward. We also talked about Zimbabwe, guys. In the past, we talked about how in certain African countries, cryptocurrency is a solution to similar problems of hyperinflation, and how the volatility by comparison is really not so bad. And here you have a really interesting piece by James Skerritt. So he talks about how Bitcoin is saving African lives. People all across Africa are turning to Bitcoin with the promise of a far better future compared to what their own countries can offer them. And that's what made me think of Zimbabwe there, as we've talked about previously. So during December of 2017, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies saw a massive surge. Of course, we all know this, but it really made a pretty big difference in Africa. And we're not talking about people that necessarily, set out for those dreams of the Lambo and whatever, but just people that adopted the technology and they were able to use that on a more regular day-to-day basis. Because a lot of people in Africa are, many of them are unbanked, or many of them have really severe limitation or cash flow problems because they can't take out money from their ATMs. There's all kinds of restrictions on that. That's certainly something that I've heard about, and people are really open to the idea of crypto because it's much easier to gain access to a telephone, to gain access to sort of a local, your own banking system effectively, than it is to deal with their banks in some situations. And you add to that those countries that are experiencing inflationary problems, and it's just a no-brainer. Crypto really does work well for a lot of them. So James has a great example here. Richard M. Bagorogo, who's a crypto enthusiast, and he lives in the Ugandan capital of Kampala. So he said that in 18 months from Bitcoin, he's earned more than what he would have made in 10 years on his normal salary. He now lives off Bitcoin because he has, quote, stated getting a job in the country is not easy. So yeah, absolutely. There's all kinds of, on top of the other issues I mentioned, employment can be a problem. So Richard has been involved in many small community gatherings where they come together and preach about what they call, quote, the gospel of Bitcoin, and share their stories, hoping to help other people get out of a financial hardship. But as Mr. Bagorogo stated, it does not always go smoothly, as many Africans know very little about what Bitcoin is. When I tried to bring my cousins on board, they called my father in the village and said, your son has gone mad. But after I sit with them and show them how I get and withdraw my money, once they see how easy it is, they also want Bitcoin. So Mr. Bagorogo is not the only individual. Of course, the Central Bank of Uganda, however, has warned the country's citizens in an open statement that investing in Bitcoin and other digital currencies are taking a risk in the financial space where there is neither investor protection nor regulatory purview. And yes, I get that. However, James points out here quite astutely that this really falls on deaf ears. because in the context of these group discussions they're having, the gospel of Bitcoin, members of that group are earning about $100 per year. So it doesn't really make sense to talk about the risk of an investment when that's kind of your alternative. That's your baseline reality, $100 per year salary. And again, on top of that, if inflation is an issue, if maybe you can't find employment, it makes a lot of sense to just really disregard that FUD. A lot of people in Africa are just using Bitcoin, forget about as an investment tool, just as a monetary transaction tool. They're not, as I said, they're not concerned with the Lambos. They're not concerned with going to the moon. They just want to be able to use a system that works. And crypto is solving that problem and some of those issues for a lot of them. So do be sure to leave James a comment. I think it's a really interesting perspective. We'd love to hear from the Africans out there in the crypto community. If you're a member of the Altcoin Buzz community, you have something to say or perspective out of Africa, would love to hear your thoughts. And do be sure to leave a comment below. As always, do be sure to follow Altcoin Buzz News Guys on Twitter. That's where you're going to be alerted to the latest as far as our publications, as far as stuff that we think is worth covering. If you like this video, please leave us a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have new content for you every day. And stay tuned, guys, for more podcast stuff that's coming out very soon. We're fine-tuning our efforts. We're making it more palatable for you. We got some great guests coming up as well. So do be sure to keep it locked on altcoinbuzz.io, Altcoin Buzz News, and on our YouTube channel. Of course, we have new content every day. With that, guys, I wish you a happy weekend, happy investing, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.